The biggest lie in China may be its population. China says it has 1.4 billion people. Here's a question. What if that's not true? Not off by a rounding error, not off by a few million, off by enough to change everything. Every trade deal, every investment, every foreign policy decision Washington has made for 30 years, all of it built on one idea. China has people. More workers. More consumers. More home buyers. More of everything, forever. But something is happening inside China right now. Something most people in this country are not paying attention to. The country is running out of people, fast. And today we're going to talk about what that actually means. Act 1, the baby crash. Let's start with what the Chinese Communist Party itself now admits. Last year, China recorded 7.92 million births. Sounds big, it isn't. Less than 10 years ago, China had nearly 18 million births a year. Today, that number has been cut by more than half. Not during a war, not during a famine, not during some kind of national catastrophe. In peacetime, under the world's second largest economy, births collapsed, and it gets worse. Deaths in China now outnumber births. Fourth year in a row. Net population loss last year, 339,000 people, gone. And that number is getting bigger every year. Now, falling birth rates are a global trend. Japan has it, South Korea has it, most of Europe has it, but those countries saw it coming over decades. They had time. China's drop happened in years. That's not a slowdown, that's a cliff, and the party knows it. How do we know they know it? Because they just did a complete 180. This is the same government that spent 30 years forcing women to have abortions, late-term abortions, dragging women in at 7 months pregnant, destroying families for having a second child, demolishing homes, ruinous fines, all to enforce the one-child policy. Now they're begging people to have children, cash bonuses, free childcare, housing discounts. Last year, Beijing spent roughly $90 billion trying to get young Chinese couples to start families. $90 billion. The result? Births fell again. Young people looked at the offer and said, no thanks. Housing costs a fortune. Raising one kid costs the equivalent of 6 years of average salary. The economy is a mess. So millions of them are making a very quiet, very private decision. They're not starting families. And no government check is going to change that. Here's where it gets more uncomfortable. Because some researchers, including people who worked inside the Chinese system, say the official numbers may not just be bad, they may be made up. Here's the logic. In China, local governments get funding based on population size. More people on paper means more money in reality. That's the incentive structure. So what do you think local officials did? They counted big, every year, even as births collapsed. In 2012, Chinese state television, their own state TV, exposed a school district in Anhui province keeping 2 sets of books, one for Beijing, inflated, one for internal use, real. They had been collecting over $10 million in fraudulent education subsidies. Ghost students, kids who didn't exist, one district, one province, one scandal that got caught. Now multiply that logic across every level of Chinese bureaucracy. For 30 years, on the most politically sensitive number in the country, the CCP says, trust us. But they also control the census. They control the data. They control who gets to ask questions. And one scholar, a former expert on China's own National Family Planning Commission, someone who spent decades inside that system, concluded that China's real fertility rate may be below 0.7, not the official 1.0, below 0.7. For context, South Korea is considered the lowest in the world at 0.72. If he's right, China isn't in demographic trouble. It's in free fall. Then came COVID. After 3 years of the most extreme lockdowns in human history, Beijing dropped everything overnight. No transition, no warning. Hundreds of millions of people hit the virus at once. Reports poured in from across the country. Overwhelmed hospitals, crematoriums running around the clock, families waiting days to recover bodies. The official death toll, suspiciously low, impossibly low. And then the Ministry of Civil Affairs did something very telling. They stopped publishing data. Quarterly mortality reports that had been public for years, gone. Some provinces just stopped updating entirely. No explanation. They just stopped. Researchers at Stanford found a workaround. They looked at a group whose deaths are publicly announced and almost impossible to hide. Members of the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the Chinese Academy of Engineering. China's most elite scientists. When one of them dies, it gets documented. Here's what they found. In December 2022, deaths among Chinese Academy of Engineering members ran at 8 times the 4-year average. 8 times. Academy of Sciences members, 6 times normal. These are the best fed, best treated, most medically privileged people in China. If they were dying at 8 times the normal rate, what was happening to everyone else? We don't know, because Beijing made sure we can't know. And a government with nothing to hide doesn't do that. Here's the thing about population. You can falsify a spreadsheet. You cannot falsify an empty classroom. In 2023 alone, China closed 14,808 kindergartens, 1 year. Then in 2024, 21,000 more. 3 years total, over 41,000 kindergartens gone. Some of those buildings have been converted into elder care facilities. Same rooms, same little cubbies where kids used to hang their backpacks. Now full of elderly people. If that image doesn't tell you something about where this is heading, nothing will. Look at marriage numbers. In 2024, only 6.1 million couples got married in China, lowest number since records began in 1980. Fewer marriages means fewer families. Fewer families means fewer children. Those missing children show up in birth statistics 3 years later. They already are. Talk to people in Beijing or Shanghai. Longtime residents will tell you the same thing. The streets feel different, quieter, restaurants half empty on a Friday night, malls that used to be packed, echoing. China claimed GDP growth of 5% last year, but consumer spending up 3.7%. In December, barely 1%. How does the world's most populous country have a demand problem? Simple. When there are fewer people, they buy less. Now let me tell you what's coming. Not speculation, math. China's own actuarial report projects the urban pension fund will run dry by 2035, 10 years away. Beijing already knows this. That's why they quietly raised the retirement age. Men from 60 to 63, women from 55 to 58, squeezing more working years out of a shrinking workforce to plug a hole that keeps getting bigger. The real estate market faces the same wall. For decades, it ran on one assumption. There will always be more young people who need homes. There won't. Property values are falling in 25 provinces across the country. Entire cities are experiencing what analysts now call Hegangification, named after a city in the Northeast where you can buy an apartment for less than a used car, because nobody's left to buy them. That used to be a small town problem. Now it's a national one. Rhodium Group estimates China will lose between 50 and 60 million people over the next decade. That's the entire population of France, gone in 10 years. And here's why this matters to you, right here, today. For 30 years, every argument for moving American manufacturing to China, every trade deal, every decision to offshore your job, rested on one premise. China has people, more than anyone, forever. What if that premise was always shakier than we were told? What if the corporations and the politicians who signed off on all of it were working from numbers Beijing had been quietly inflating for decades? Those are not comfortable questions, but they are the right ones. Here's what we know. China's birth rate is collapsing. Its population is aging faster than almost any country in history. Its schools are closing by the tens of thousands. Its pension system is headed toward insolvency. Its property market is imploding. And its government has shut down independent access to every piece of data that might let anyone verify any of it. You don't need conspiracy theories. You can see it in empty classrooms, in canceled weddings, in kindergartens converted to nursing homes, in a government that went from forced abortions to cash bribes for babies because reality left them no other choice. Demographic decline doesn't arrive with sirens. It moves slowly, quietly, until one day, the foundation is already gone. China will survive, the Chinese people will survive, but the story Beijing has been selling the world, limitless people, limitless growth, limitless future. That story is over. The only question is, how long before everyone is forced to admit it? Because the final lie was never just the number. The final lie was the belief that a number, any number, can be controlled forever. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.